Well, friends, welcome to another TRUETONE Lounge. Today, we are honored to have Steuart Smith of the Eagles. So thank you for coming, Steuart.
Thank you. Thanks for having
Yes.
me.
Of course, besides the last 20 years that Steuart has spent, with the Eagles, he has a career as a record producer with, Rodney Crowell and Shawn Colvin. And as a session man, he's worked with Vince Gill and Joni Mitchell and Melissa Etheridge and Rosanne Cash and all sorts of artists. And again, we're honored to thank you so much for doing this. It's a real treasure. So thank you.
Happy to be invited. Thank you, Zach.
All right. Well, let's start at the beginning. When did music kind of hit you and you actually wanted to learn to play an instrument?
I would say very young. Not that I could play, sort of banged on the piano, but I was conscious enough of music that I was aware of pop music. The first record I ever owned, I must have been, I don't know, 7 or 8 years old. It was the Everly Brothers, Till I Kissed You. And it was a Christmas present. But on top of that, from age of 7 to 11, I sang in a boys' choir, which I loved. Our church was Episcopalian, Anglican Episcopalian, which is very British. It was the Church of England, essentially.
Right.
A couple of the priests actually had posh English accents. But what it also meant was that you were drawing material from the entirety of European, Holy Roman Empire liturgy.
Right.
And so it was pretty deep and broad, and I loved that. That was great. But yeah, even as a very young kid, I responded to music, and everybody in the family was interested in music in one form or another. My parents were part of an amateur Gilbert and Sullivan troupe that performed I think every fall they chose a show and would put it on, and it was more of a social thing, I think, for them. But and they listened to opera, which I've never been able to make my peace with, but respected that. But what was really handy for me, I think, was my brothers. I had two older brothers. The oldest one loved anything to do with harmony. Beach Boys, Letterman, a Kingston Trio, New Christie Minstrels, all that stuff. And of
Right.
course, obviously, was very much in the folk era, but the Beach Boys too were huge in his world. And that was, I shared that love too. And my other brother was into down and dirty R&B soul music, Stax Volt. Motown was even a little too namby-pamby for him, a little too sweet. James Brown. Yeah, all that Stax Volt stuff in particular, and Muscle Shoals. But he listened to only one white artist that I remember, and he adored that artist, and it was Bob Dylan. So all of those things were floating around the house, and yeah, that was a nice time. And like I said, I banged on the piano, but not very productively, but enough to sort of figure out this and that. My mom once taught me the first few bars of Moonlight Sonata. She played piano a little bit, so yeah.
So when did the guitar come into the picture?
Well, the first thing that came into the picture was my mom's banjo ukulele, which I still have. It's one with the headstock that says the Gibson, so I guess that dates it to a pretty early time.
Right.
Played that because my oldest brother, the one that liked all the harmony, he would have friends over and they would sit and play folk music, learning folk music and stuff. And so I would try to learn these songs on the banjo uke. One of the guys that came over had a thumb pick and used it to finger pick. And I, of course, said, well, then that's what you have to do. I mean, you have to have a thumb pick. And so that's why I adopted that. But the guitar, my oldest brother also had an inexpensive Silvertone. And at some point towards the end of 6th grade, I got pneumonia. and I was stuck in the house. Both my parents worked. I had the house to myself, and I would just go into my older brother's room and steal his Silvertone and open up like a folk singer's guide to material, to songs with the little chord diagrams and all that stuff. So that would put me at about 11 and 12 when I guess the guitar showed up.
Yeah, that's very interesting about the thumb pick. I was gonna say, was it from the Folkies or from the Chet people? Because those tend to be the ones that tend to be into the thumb pick. Yeah,
Absolutely. And those things also aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, but yeah, it was folk music, the finger picking thing,
yeah,
Travis picking, I guess, of a sort.
yeah.
Yeah, it just, when it came time to play other things, when I started getting into pop music and rock and roll, I just never took the thumb pick off. And it was not really a conscious decision or anything. I didn't think I was being clever using one. I thought
Yeah.
I think what you had to do.
Yeah. So there wasn't any pressure from other players going like, ditch that thumb pick, use a flat pick like everyone else is using.
Well, you had the advantage of, I never dropped a pick.
Right. Right. So when do you start really getting serious about the guitar?
Well, I had sort of fits, these bursts of intense interest for a couple of months, and I'd play guitar all the time and learn songs, and then I'd get kind of sick of it and walk away from it for months at a time. But there was a certain amateur seriousness about that. I don't think I even had the opportunity to be a full-on guitarist until I was in my mid-20s. When I first started playing in bands in DC, there were so many great guitar players there.
Right.
I had just enough keyboard chops to get through, arrangements and stuff. I was not a fancy player at all, but I came to DC as a piano player. Just, you were more valued because there were so few of us that could play the keyboards. And I mainly use it as an arranging tool. But I didn't have an opportunity to have my own gig as a guitar player in a really professional setting until I was about 25 or something like that, I think.
You just kind of hit on something, of course there was tons of, you said that DC is known for, the guitar players and the guitar players in that scene, because you've got Roy Buchanan and Danny Gatton and John Jennings and all these guys. So were you going and seeing those guys play? Were those guys influences on you?
Yeah, absolutely. And one that you've never heard of probably, which I'll tell you in a second. When we first got together, this band got together in DC, I moved in 73, and we didn't have any gigs, but we were sort of at the rehearsal stage getting our stuff together. And the first night I ever went out to a bar, they were all saying, "You got to see this guy, Danny Gatton." And so I went to the Keg in Washington, D.C., and it was Liz Meyer and friends with Danny and the Fat Boys.
Okay.
And Danny and the Fat Boys was Danny's trio. And they were backing up this woman, Liz Meyer, and another guy whose name escapes me. And at that, the Gatton was in Telecaster mode with an Echoplex, and utterly mind-boggling. I was so glad that I was there as a piano player. I said, I'm not even going to try to do what these guys are doing. But and Danny was great, and he had tons of technique. Had a very large vocabulary, but I think Roy had more to say. There was more on Roy's mind. Roy was kind of a tortured artist. I guess in a way Danny might have been as well. They both committed suicide, and
Yeah.
a strange coincidence there. But they definitely were influences. But the band that I was playing keyboards for had a guitar player named Mike Dennis,
Okay.
who was just a fabulous guitar player. And at that time, the talk about Roy was, okay, his rig is Telecaster, Vibrolux, I believe, yeah, Vibrolux, everything on 10 except for the reverb, and everything else from here, from the guitar. Well, Mike Dennis did a similar thing, only he used a Strat and a Pro reverb, everything on 10. And he was the most lovely player, very lyrical and melodic and tone. And at that time, most players were either Telly players or Les Paul players, at least in DC. The Strat was not the thing like it became later, not for Hendrix, of course, had that thing, but if you imitated Hendrix, you just sounded like Hendrix. I mean, there was no way to make it your own.
Yeah.
But so there were a couple of us were the Strat players, but when it came time for me to play guitar, I just duplicated Mike Dennis's rig. Exactly the Pro reverb, everything on 10, got me a 1966 Stratocaster. And that was really a great bit of the influence on me from Mike. It's sort of Roy through Mike.
Wow.
And a bit of Gatton too. I mean, I aimed for a little bit more varied technique, I would say.
So when did you kind of jump from the local stage to the bigger stage? Was it Rodney or was it before that? Did you work with Nils Lofgren as a keyboard player?
Yeah, I was a recovering keyboard player. Yeah, in 81, a mutual friend of ours who was Nils's crew knew that Nils was looking for a keyboard player for a European tour. And of course, Nils was really big in Europe. He could do that there. I was playing guitar, but it was a good gig. So I woodshedded, I rented out a studio room somewhere with a piano and learned all this stuff and played my butt off and got the audition. And so, yeah, I did a couple of tours with Nils. And in fact, I noticed the other day, something showed up on the internet of Nils Lofgren and me playing at what they refer to as the Roxy. I don't know that there was ever a Roxy in Washington, D.C. I suspect it might have been the Bayou, but it's just me and Nils.
Wow.
And I'm playing keyboards and guitar, and he's playing guitar and keyboards and singing. I have no recollection of that gig at all.
But there you are.
There I am.
So did Nils, were you already kind of formed as a player by that point? Did Nils, did his style rub off on you at all? Because again, another Strat guy with a thumb pick. Was there any?
Yeah. No, I was formed. I pretty much was headed for what I was going to be at that time. Yeah, the thumb pick thing. It's funny. I didn't even know Nils was a thumb pick player, but I would go to Washington Music. I think I told you this the other day. Go to Washington Music to get the good Hercos.
Yeah.
See if I find the ones that were the right length and all that. And it was always cleaned out because Nils had been there the day before, and he'd gotten all the good ones.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, Nils was great to work with. I had so much fun on that gig. He was a great boss. And just a great guy and wonderful player, of course. So, but no, I think I was pretty much doing my thing at that point.
Yeah. Backing up a bit, who were some of your major influences, guys that really, helped, that were, that were big influences on you?
Well, for one, Mike Dennis
Right.
was really, really important. I don't know. There were a lot of guys that whose material I probably loved. I was a real Brit guy. I mean, Clapton, Beck, and Page, definitely huge in my life. Robbie Krieger, I thought the first few Doors records were pretty amazing. And they were the first live band I ever saw, and they were great. And Krieger was wonderful. I think he's one of those kind of under the radar guys. He deserves to be in the top 100 or whatever list you got going, for sure. Larry Carlton, I mean, his work in the 70s for me with Joni and Steely Dan, unparalleled. Certainly an inspiration. I don't think you could ever imitate him. What an incredibly lyrical player that guy is. Beck to a certain degree, I guess.
Yeah.
Page. Trying to think if there was anybody else on the outskirts that.
You I think you've also mentioned Andy Summers at different times, saying, like his note stacking and things
Another.
like that. Yeah.
He ought to be in the top, top 100, certainly top 50, what have you. Yeah, but that was an influence on me pretty late on in the DC years. Late 70s, early 80s. I played in a couple of bands where I was like pretty much the only guitar player, so you had to come up with a style which Andy Summers was great, with sonic stuff. Yeah, but I'm not sure that you would count him as a real influence.
Right.
Say.
So let's move up to you hitting kind of a bigger stage. So after Nils, the next kind of big thing, and correct me if I'm wrong, is Rodney is playing with Rodney Crowell.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So how did you hook up with Rodney? Well, go ahead.
Well, there was a band called Switchblade, which was the last band that I played with in the DC area with any regularity. And it was, they sort of jokingly called it Psychobilly. It was a rockabilly band that was kind of bursting out to be a little bit rocker, a little bit more contemporary. A bunch of songs by the bass player, Johnny Castle, some really fun material, totally sexist and politically incorrect, but a lot of fun and a shot at playing a lot of guitar. Well, there was a management team that had handled Mary Chapin Carpenter, and who was also from our neck of the woods. And they put together a 5-song demo production deal and a honest to goodness showcase in New York City that was attended by every major label. And one of the guys that was there from Sony, a VP at Sony, is a guy named Rick Chertoff, who at the time was finishing up Cyndi Lauper's first big record. And he'd been a part of a lot of great projects there, the Hooters, Patti Smythe with Scandal. I can't recall everybody, but he was a bigwig there, and he liked the band just fine, but didn't know what to do with them, he said. But he liked me, and a couple of years later, he called me up to do some pre-production on a Patti Smythe record. And I would go up there maybe once every couple of months for a week, and we'd sit and run arrangements down and stuff like that. Nothing really gelled. But then he got word that there's this singer-songwriter from Nashville who wanted to get out of the country market and into something a little more broad. And it was Rodney. And Rick introduced the two of us in May 1986 up in New York at the record plant. And we instantly connected, and it really was an instantaneous thing of, okay, this is somebody I can work with. And yeah.
Both, correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed like both he and Rosanne were wanting to push toward a crossover record, and they were wanting to kind of leave the country market, and that was Rodney's Street Language and Rosanne's like Rhythm and Romance. They were both kind of pushing in more of a pop rock kind of direction.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And I caught the tail end of the project. We only did one song for that Street Language record. I did Let Freedom Ring, and it was my Strat through a couple of Marshalls turned on all the way up. And that was the sort of thing Rodney was willing to experiment with at that point. It didn't really take, obviously, but
right.
Yeah, they both were seeking other things.
Yeah. So how soon after that do you become, he and Rosanne, his wife at the time, their touring player? Did that happen instantaneous, or?
It happened real fast. I mean, Rodney and I hit it off so quickly. So that was May. We probably worked. Oh, I know. We worked through the summer. The first video I ever did which with Rodney, I guess it was maybe his first video too, was for Let Freedom Ring, which of course didn't really go anywhere, but we shot that video in New York in just a steamy hot summer. So I guess the fall came and Rodney brought me down to Nashville, introduced me to Rosanne. All of us kind of hit it off and started this little creative swirl. And I gave Rodney the name of a couple of friends of mine from up in DC, Vince Santoro, drummer, great singer.
Right.
And later on, Jim Hansen, who was a great bass player and singer. But we did a tour that in '86. So yeah, it happened very fast. Met in May, did the video in the summer, toured in the fall. And at the end of that tour, the following year, '87, started working on King's Record Shop.
Right, for Rosanne. So now, again, touring with Rodney, his albums up to that point had had James Burton and Albert Lee and, you know, all these other guys. And so how did you, what was the attitude toward that as far as Rodney was concerned about you having to imitate that, or did you have the freedom? It looks like you had the freedom to kind of come up with your own parts on those songs. You didn't have to really imitate what they had done.
Absolutely. No, Rodney has always been and always will be just whatever it is that you feel, you know, that's what it's going to be. You don't have to learn anybody's licks back to back or anything.
Yeah. So King's Record Shop, I guess Tony Brown produced that. Is that correct? Or did Rodney produce that?
I think Rodney produced that. Yeah.
Okay.
Rodney produced that.
Okay.
Yeah. And I uncredited co-produced it as well. I mean, I did a lot of the arranging and stuff at that point.
Okay.
I think that was an important thing for me with Rodney and Rosanne, was that I came from an arranging place and would help them, you know, structure songs and all that. Not that they were incapable of it. I mean, obviously they're both brilliant, you know, but it was, you know, they were also wide open for stuff. And I was bringing in, I think, some ideas that were, you know, non-Nashville type ideas that they were liking. And, you know, when we worked up the stuff for Rodney's Diamonds and Dirt, that was stuff that was, I think, tweaked on the road. We'd learn the stuff on the road and tweak it. Yeah. And same with Rosanne.
What was it like, you know, recording for the first time in Nashville, you know, and with those players?
Well, it was great. Barry Beckett was playing keyboards, and
yeah,
that was, you know, one of my heroes, of course. And it was great. It was really good. Yeah. Billy Joe Walker was part of the band. He was great. Michael Rhodes, who was on so many projects at that time that we did together.
Yeah,
it was great. It was wonderful. You know, they say if you get any better, play with people that are better than you, and that was definitely the case.
And at this, this kind of go a little bit into the gear stuff. But what guitars and amps and stuff were you using at this point? You know, playing on those records.
I owned 2 guitars.
What were they?
The 66 Strat, and then the white Strat that some people recognize, that was the body and all that was 56, but the electronics appear to have been 63.
Okay.
And as I was saying to you the other day, unfortunately, the neck pickup, the original one, or the one that it came with, died. I replaced it with something a friend of mine, Matt, down the road at Action Music, put in a comparable replacement. And but those were the 2 guitars. That was pretty much it. And then I bought from Sam Bush a 1956 Esquire that pickup died somewhere in the wiring. It was screwed up, and Joe Glazer very kindly said, "Well, you know, Jerry Reed had me put some modern pickups in his Telecaster, and he didn't want to hang on to the old pickups, and I've been holding on to them for quite a few years. They would work great in your Esquire if you want to tell it." And so we did that, and that was my 3rd guitar, my 3rd really good guitar, you know, proper.
So you've got 3 guitars. What amps and pedals were you using on those records?
Well, Boss Echo has always been my thing. So, compressor, the Boss compressor to a certain degree. I'm trying to remember what I used amp wise. At one time I had a Silverface Twin, which, forgive me, I mean, they are usually awful amps, I think, particularly
Yeah.
for guitar, for something you want to turn up. But this guy, Keith Campbell in DC, had sold me this one that was unlike any I've ever, you put it on 3 and it sounded kind of like a great Vibrolux. And it was probably that. I think I had a Fender concert amp maybe at one point. I literally am not sure. I don't
Yeah.
recall. I
So,
did have a Fender 212 cabinet that I use sometimes.
yeah. So basically you had those 2 or 3 Fender guitars, the 2 Strats and the Esquire, and you had a couple Boss pedals, and you had a Fender amp of some sort, Silverface Twin, something like, which is a very simple rig. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. A
Yeah.
lot of people, other guitar players are coming like, "Hey man, I really dig your simple rig," and then they bring in, Lincoln Center
Yeah.
humongous amps.
So you mentioned the Diamonds and Dirt, and on Diamonds and Dirt, it was really it was interesting because your use of the tremolo bar on the Strat in kind of a clean way and kind of a really interesting way, kind of doing some interesting dive bombs and then doing, like pedal steel type bends and stuff like that. Where was that coming from? Was that just coming from your imagination, or? Yeah.
Let's see what'll happen. What happens if we do this?
Right.
One, two. Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
because you have.
I was kind of winding towards a little something of what Beck does. Not consciously at all at the time, and I don't think that I'm not sure that I didn't listen to Jeff Beck until Commotion and Emotion
Okay.
several years back, along with Ronnie Scott's Live at Ronnie Scott's. And Beck has this thing where he's using the whammy bar.
Right.
That's kind of what I was doing. It was a different take on it, but
Yeah.
using the whammy bar as an expressive thing for, half steps, whole steps, whatever, dive bombs too occasionally, but trying to make it part of the sound,
Yeah. The expressive of it. Yeah, it's interesting on the Diamonds and Dirt album. That was kind of one of the first times people had been exposed to the Strat being used in, in that kind of clean chicken picking thing, and the use of the tremolo bar like that. And so,
Yeah.
yeah. And where did all those like open string, fast, licks and stuff, where was that coming from? Just again, out of your mind, just trying to
I
do the
have
right thing for the track, or?
I have no idea. If I heard it in my head, I tried to play it. And often that was a thing. I mean, I would hear a certain kind of thing and realize that I didn't have the technique to do it, but then I would sit down and work it out, figure out how do I make it do this? And yeah.
Yeah. So you continue so then you're of course touring and recording with both Rosanne and Rodney. And so that's kind of a neat situation where you're playing on the records, you're doing some arranging. And as far as arranging, are you mainly arranging instruments, or are you arranging vocals too, or?
Not so much the vocals, but the structure, song structure. I'm a big fan of like solos being part of the arrangement. Sometimes when it comes times for a solo, maybe modulate or put some different changes or what have you. And yeah, it was mainly structural stuff. And like with the Cicadas, I know that was a big leap in time, but
Right.
Rodney would give me a song, or Rodney would have a song floating around, and I would do a bunch of things to it. And I remember being very influenced by the Beatles' Help period and the flat 7 chord and all that. And I would make chord changes. A lot of it was chord substitution and bass movement for me.
Okay.
A lot of the arrangement from there. But, something that, say, John Leventhal does beautifully, where your second verse doesn't necessarily have to have the exact same changes as the first verse. Maybe you put a little wrinkle here and there where the bass moves or what have you. So, yeah.
So you continue with Rodney and Rosanne, and of course, those King's Record Shop and Diamonds and Dirt were huge records for both of them.
Yeah, yeah.
And then their follow-up records didn't do as well because everyone wanted, I'm sure the labels all wanted part 2.
Right, exactly.
As they always do. If you have a hit, you got to put out part 2. And Rosanne didn't do that at all.
Right.
She had a very introspective, record, and that was acoustic, and had you had some real interesting uses of echo, and it almost seemed like there was an influence of African music, like Paul Simon's Graceland, and some of that in some of your playing.
That's certainly possible because Graceland was probably a contemporary with that period of time that we were working up interiors. I certainly not consciously, but
Right.
very possibly, because that was in the wind. The sounds of the guitars, the high life, and all that stuff.
Right.
Yeah, possible.
Yeah. So how does Shawn Colvin come into the picture?
Well, she was, I guess, Rosanne was not exclusively a country artist, of course. She was more of a pop singer-songwriter. And sharing that field would have been Shawn at that time, in the public eye. But I remember meeting Shawn at the Bottom Line in New York on a Rosanne gig. And I think Shawn was asked to come up and sit in on a song. And so Shawn was real aware of me. There was a New York connection with Rodney and Rosanne. That was sort of their other side. And and Rick Chertoff, the producer who introduced me to Rodney, also introduced me to a guy named Steuart Lerman, who has produced a ton of records that I've worked on. And so there was a New York connection. And of course, living in DC, I would just get on the train and come to New York. I did a fair amount of work there. And Shawn was part of the New York scene there. So that was probably where she heard of me. The way we actually hooked up to record was through Larry Klein, who, boy, all this circuitous.
Yes, stuff. Joni Mitchell and
Joni Mitchell's husband at the time. Rodney had hooked up with Larry through Bobby Colombi, who was a Sony A&R guy at that point, I guess. And so we did 3 songs with Larry there. And then Larry's next project was, I think at that time, was Fat City, which was Shawn's second record. And Shawn sort of requested to work with me. And because we were already working together with Rodney and Larry, that was very natural that we would do that. And then we would play to promote Fat City as a trio. Did a couple of gigs here and there, and it went over really well and was really a fun thing. And that became a thing, the trio with Larry and Shawn.
Fat City's that has Round of Blues on there, which that's a really great solo where a lot of guys might have played something with some drive and played single note lines. You played a lot of double stops with a clean sound.
Right.
Yeah, that's wouldn't have been the most common thing, especially during that era. I mean, it really made the solo pop out because it's like, hey, this guy, where's the distortion and the heavy echo and everything.
Yeah.
So was that a conscious decision on your part of that, is this just me doing my thing, or I'm trying to be different, or you wanted to play harmonized things, which of course don't work as well when you have a bunch of distortion on there?
Once again, I really couldn't tell you
Yeah,
where it came from. I mean, it doesn't sound unusual to me.
right. Yeah. So then, so did you record or play first with Shawn?
We recorded first.
Okay.
I'm going to say, yes, we recorded first because the first time we ever played live was actually at the Troubadour. They had it was a big record release thing at the Troubadour, and it was us with a variety of musicians coming and going. Richard Thompson, uh, Crosby and Nash.
Oh,
I can't, Booker T, a bunch of people that had participated or were at least peripherally involved with the making of that record came and sang and did a song or two with us. And then we went up as a trio to, was it the American Music Hall? Something in San Francisco.
that is in San Francisco. Yeah.
Yeah, and then we did a show up there as a trio. We might have done a trio one or two other times, but then we toured to promote the record at full-fledged committed trio. And then I did the covers record with her, the first covers record with her, and then we toured behind that, which I believe is Austin City Limits. Shawn Colvin just recently showed up on YouTube. I had never seen it before.
Yes.
And that was touring behind Fat City, and we were preparing arrangements, I think, for the covers record at that point.
And you produced the covers album.
Part of it, yeah, about half of it.
Okay. And how did that come about? Was that one of your first big productions?
I guess, yeah, I suppose so. Credited with Rodney and Rosanne. That stuff was co-produced and by me, although I don't remember if I was credited. Some stuff I was, some I wasn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just she needed a record to release. She hadn't written anything, and she was known for doing great covers, great cover versions of songs. It just seemed a logical thing to do and a good way to sort of, okay, let's not have to worry about, starting from scratch on a, written record, an entire, bunch of material. So, yeah, it seemed a logical thing to do. And we did that mostly out in LA.
And a small sidetrack on gear. By this point, it looked like on the 66 Strat, which you played a lot, it seemed like you changed the pickups out to EMGs. Why did that happen?
Because I was doing a record in Nashville at a studio called The Castle. I don't know if it's still there. Probably
It
not.
is.
It is?
Yeah.
And we were doing a ballad for somebody, and the RF was so bad that I couldn't use my Strat. So I borrowed one from Larry Byram, bless his heart. And he had EMGs on it and it sounded great. And I said, okay, I'm gonna have to do that to one of my guitars. So I did it to the 66 as opposed to the 56. So
Yeah. Do you also have the mid-range boost on there too, or is it just the regular controls?
regular control.
Okay. All right. So then we also get into you starting to really do a lot of session work in Nashville. I mean, you're doing session work everywhere, but you kind of, start, and I'm guessing that was through Tony Brown.
Yes, yeah. Tony was definitely the conduit to get into all that. Yeah.
And you were being flown, because again, you live in the DC area and you're being, flown into Nashville. Of course, this was a different era and budgets were such that they could afford to fly in a player.
Yeah.
And why do you think you were flown in?
Just because I wasn't, another one of the guys that does all the records,
Right.
something a little different, I guess. And I think my playing was different enough, at least at that time, that it had something to offer. But yeah, they were flying me down like a couple times a month. And of course, those days they were doing records in a week. So a lot of records in a year.
Yeah. So let's talk about Winona Judd. So, of course, she had been in the duo with her mom, and then they went in a different direction, with her solo albums, and much more in a kind of R&B influenced. And then, of course, still with the Don Potter being involved, the great, of course, a great guitar player in general, but especially a great acoustic player.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So tell us about how you ended up working with Winona and Don Potter and I guess Britt
Well,
Mayer. Yeah.
I mean, again, didn't Tony produce that stuff, right?
Right.
His
Yeah.
certainly the first couple of records. Tony said, "Come on, Steuart,
Yeah.
let's go work with Y."
Yeah.
Yeah, and of course, that was a great band. Yeah, Don Potter, what an amazing player, and Willie Weeks,
Yeah.
Eddie Ayers, just fabulous stuff. Yeah, and her first record, I remember, was very much done in uncharacteristically. Her stuff wasn't done in a week. There were groups of songs, and they were really looking for a sound for her. And I think you can sort of hear that on her first solo record, that there's a lot of, it's kind of all over the map. The next one, Tell Me Why, seems a little bit more of a piece.
Right.
And it was done, I think, a little more quickly.
Yeah. And are you still pretty much using the same gear, the Strat, a Fender amp, and some pedals?
Yeah, pretty much. I started doing some stuff with stereo. Oh, another amp that's probably showed up around then is my 63, what used to be a chocolate brown 63 super amp.
Okay.
No reverb.
Yeah.
It's a deluxe with no reverb, basically, is what it is.
Right.
Tens. And I started using that in conjunction, I think, with that twin that I mentioned.
Wow.
For some stereo stuff. And
yeah, because those brown amps tend to be a little bit more mid-rangey, so that would be a good complement for that twin.
Yeah, it was. I mean, even if you weren't doing the stereo thing, just in terms of the sonics, yeah, of that mid-range fullness, yeah.
Yeah. So basically, the Strats and the Esquire, those two amps and some Boss pedals. Yeah.
That's pretty much it. Yeah.
And again, to contrast with the fact that most session guys would have shown up with a trunk, full of guitars.
Oh.
They would have had 10 different amps. They would have had a rack, not a pedal board, at this point. So this was a huge departure.
Yeah. I guess it was. I mean, it was what tended to work for me. Interesting tale about when I think the first session that Tony had me play on, oh gosh, what was his name? James. Can I recall his last name?
He's a guitarist. Was he a guitarist or a producer or what?
No, it was a singer-songwriter.
Okay.
That Tony was producing tracks on. And at the time, there was Soundstage Studios, and there was Front Stage and Backstage. And Tony worked out of Backstage. And what is the guy who's my age is telling here, who handled MCA before Tony, famous producer.
Yes. Why am oh my goodness. Yes, famously Garth Brooks got rid of him. Yes, he was the head of Capitol Records. I'm completely blanking on him too. Oh my goodness.
I know.
Yeah.
This is terrible.
Yes.
You'll have to edit this out.
It'll be fine. Everyone will comment in it, saying it was so and so. So
well, at any rate,
yes.
Jimmy Bowen.
Jimmy Bowen. Yes, thank you. You saved us.
Jimmy Bowen had Front Stage. Tony had Backstage, but Jimmy Bowen was so thrilled with this whole thing of not having any amps or anything. Everything was direct.
Yes.
Into the board, including drums, all of it, and sounded like it. I mean,
yes.
Those records did not sound pretty good. But the first sessions we did there, James House is the artist we did this with. Tony said, "Yeah, come on, just go ahead and get a rental amp or whatever, whatever you need, and we'll we'll deal with what we have to deal with, you know. And so I got there to the session and we're getting set up, and there was a Fender amp of some kind in there that I'd ordered. And the engineer, the second engineer was setting up mics, was staring at the amplifier and he had a microphone in his hands. He's looking at the amp and he goes, "Where do I put this?"
Yes. Yes. Because Jimmy had completely changed the landscape of Nashville sessions to where it was the norm to go direct for everyone. And it was a huge battle for the guitar players to get to use amps again. So it would have been very usual for the engineer to be like, "Where do I put a microphone on an amp?" No idea.
He had never had to mic a guitar amp before in his life.
Yeah.
And he had done many records, you know, so.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're working with Tony Brown. You're doing Winona, and then Tony calls you to play on the Vince Gill records.
Yes. Yeah. I guess that was probably Tony's call. I already knew Vince. Vince, bless his heart, had to open up for Rodney. I think we were touring in Canada for Diamonds and Dirt, and Vince was the opening act. And so I knew him at least a little. He was always, he treated me very nicely. He would say, "Hey man, I really like a lot of what you're trying to do up there."
Yeah. Yes. Very, very nice. Yeah. Yeah.
What a sweetheart. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Amazing guitar player and singer.
Yeah. So that's an interesting, situation. You're being called to play on a guitar player's record. And so how do the sessions go down, like in the tracking, or so obviously, so I'm assuming you're part of the tracking, and
Yeah,
what's is Vince playing or singing? What's he doing during the
my
tracking?
recollection is that he mainly concentrated on singing. Yeah.
Okay.
He may have played the occasional guitar but all of his solos were overdubbed. So basically all we were doing was, support and whatever sort of instrumental hooks and themes had to happen.
Yeah.
And then he recorded his solos later. Yeah, pretty sure it was really concentrating on the singing.
Yeah. And just to kind of give credit where credit is due, because a lot of people think that some of these intros, they thought that, Vince played them and you played them. Like, What the Cowgirls Do is one example of that, where you came up with the intro on that. And I Still Believe in You would be another one. What about, let's see, now I'm blanking. One More Last Chance. Was that one that you played or Vince played, or?
I played it. I don't remember. Does that have a signature lick up front?
Yeah, it has a little bit of a signature lick at the beginning. So yeah. So, but basically you played a fair number of kind of intros, and then Vince would play the guitar solo. Is that kind of the tendency?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah.
I don't think I ever played a solo on a Vince record. I know that.
Right, because it's his record, but still, that's very, very interesting. Again, you're still using the same rig you've been using, the Strat and the.
Pretty much, yeah. I'm sure I probably had acquired a few other guitars, but not many.
Now, are you being called much to play acoustic at this point, or are you still mainly doing electric guitar?
There were some circumstances there for a while where I was playing a fair amount of acoustic, but electric was really mainly what people would hire me for.
Yeah. So then we get up to the Shawn Colvin, few small repairs that you didn't play on, but then you toured with her again with the trio format again.
Yeah. Well, actually, we did a couple of tours. We did a full band tour for that record, and her next one. We did a full band tour too, pretty brief ones, really, just kind of to promote the record.
Yeah.
Yeah, we did. We toured a lot live for those records. Yeah.
And when you're on the Leventhal produced stuff that he played on, how much pressure did you feel to reproduce exactly what John had done?
I didn't feel pressure to, but I felt inclined to because the parts were great, and yeah, like even to the point I really went to some trouble to work out the front of Sunday Came Home. The little, so there's a bendy violin, fiddle,
Right.
trying to work that into the.
Yes, I didn't. It was interesting when asking him about that intro, and it was the fact that he had taken a fiddle or violin, and he had just plucked it and slid up and finger picked on a violin. That's a interesting part, and you tended to kind of play it up higher and use some chorus on there to kind of give you some of that modulation of.
It was.
Yeah, and then you would play those octaves to give it that bigger sound.
Yeah. It was. I mean, it was fun. It was fun to take those parts and try to get as many of them in as possible. Certainly in that trio, you had like a great rhythm section of Larry Klein and Shawn. Between the two of them, they were like a little orchestra, and that left a lot of empty space for me to do things. And just with like John's production on records, second verse may be quite different than the first one chordally or whatever, or certainly in vibe, and then you might want to look for another sound. The fun for me with that trio was trying to duplicate, the effect of the record without necessarily having to play every single note.
Yeah.
And John's parts and playing are so beautiful,
Did you looking at footage from that era, it looks like you had started using a volume pedal by this point. Was when did you start using the volume pedal?
Well, forgive me because I let you misspeak. No, in fact, my I was using the volume pedal very early on.
Okay.
I think that was part of my rig when I joined up with Rodney. I can't imagine it wouldn't have been.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, my fault on that. Yeah, that was also a part of the rig, and a chorus pedal, often, tremolo.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I guess you were using the volume pedal for swells and things like that to fill things out, especially with playing in that type of format, kind of giving a little bit of a wash of sound, at certain points. Yeah. So I guess we get up to Don Henley then. So
yeah. Which that came about because the tour with Shawn, gosh, was that? Yeah, it was the last of her touring in 97. 97, is that right? Yeah, that's right. The trio, we were doing some Lilith Fair stuff and then doing our own gigs as well. And towards the end of that touring, right before we went to Australia, which was our last tour, let's say spring to early summer of 97, we played the John Ford Amphitheater. It was an outdoor amphitheater in LA. We did at least 2 nights, maybe 3. And Henley was there one of those nights. And I guess he sort of liked what he saw. And I don't recall if it was months or a year. Eventually I got a call from him to see if maybe about working on a solo album for him, which he was in the midst of with Stan Lynch out in LA. And so because he had seen me with Shawn, that led to the thing with Don. He was already a huge Shawn Colvin fan. But so I came out to LA for about a week, worked with Stan and Don, and very little of what we did that week made the final cut. And there were just a ton of songs that were up for, development. But we also, the three of us, Stan and Don and I, wrote a song, put a song together, recorded a demo. And I think that was kind of a good thing for Don. He was confident that I could maybe co-write if needed or whatever. And so, yeah, we got along great. It was a little while later that the Eagles thing came up, but
did you do a tour with Don before that, or was the first touring that you did was the Eagles?
The first touring I did was with the Eagles. Don actually, at the end of the sessions that we did in LA, said, if you're ever interested, I'm going to be doing some touring, maybe we could get you to come out and play. And at the time I had so many records that I was working on that it didn't make sense at that point, but I was, incredibly grateful to be asked. But then, the thing with Mr. Felder happened, and I got the call for that.
So the one of the records that you were working on at that point when Don had asked you was Rodney's Houston Kid. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Which that's a solid effort.
That's, in some ways, that's my favorite record with Rodney.
Yeah. It's a great album. Yeah.
Really good stuff.
Yeah. So how did that come about, where, because again, Rodney had been such a, producer, of his own albums in the past. And then of course there was this stuff with Tony. So was it easy for Rodney to kind of turn over the keys to someone else, or is he,
Well, Rodney and I have been collaborative really always. I've always had input in the arrangements and stuff, and he's always welcomed it. I don't think there wasn't a sense of shifting gears with the Houston Kid, other than the fact that we weren't going for country. We weren't aiming it for a market or anything like that. We were just making a record.
right?
But it was just a continuation of what we had already been doing. He and I we are collaborators when we work together, and that's always been the case, and seems to work out.
Yeah.
That was tons of fun making that record, that Houston Kid record.
Yeah. And I guess a standout would be, is it Wandering Boy or Wandering Boyd? Which
it's Wandering Boy.
Okay. I've seen it, misspelled a number of times. I was like, what is that?
We didn't really give him a proper name that I recall.
Okay. Yeah, your work on the soloing at the end is just is beautiful. So
thank you. That's funny, because at that time, I think I had said to Rodney, I am so sick of guitar solos. If I never have to play another one as long as I live, it'll be too soon. But that just was begging for it. Yeah. And it just happened, and so there you go.
Yeah, and there's like harpsichord, and there's all sorts of interesting things on that track that you put on there. Yeah, it's beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So then, of course, as you said, there was a split in the old Eagles, and then all of a sudden there was an open position, and so yeah. And so then who contacts you first?
Oh, wow. Don.
Yeah.
Don's very nice about that. I mean, if there's a serious thing to be done, he'll do it himself. He'll talk to you directly, and he won't necessarily have his people do it.
Right.
Yeah, I was in Nashville, and Rodney and I were rehearsing with a guy named Randall Mullen, I believe was his last name, Australian guy. Used to play with Shania Twain.
Okay.
Good guy, good guitar player. And the three of us were doing a little bit of a touring thing to promote, I don't know what. But also, well, I was rehearsing with Rodney in Nashville. And at the end of that rehearsal period, I got together with Shawn. And Shawn and John Leventhal put together the band to promote her newest record, which was the follow-up to A Few Small Repairs, called A Whole New You. And we got that record worked up plus a few songs and did an Austin City Limits,
Right.
which kicked off a tour that led to Los Angeles, the final gig of which was at the Roxy Theater there. We had a day off, and the next day I started the tour with Rodney, with this trio at the Roxy again, and then we went off to do a few weeks worth. Don had called me while I was rehearsing with Rodney and said, think about it, think if this is maybe something you want to do. And on my day off in Los Angeles, I had to go play for Glenn. Don said, I want you to come and play for my buddy. And,
Yeah.
and went and played with for Glenn, and he liked it. And there she went.
Do you remember what tune you played for Glenn, or tunes?
Well, I worked up about 10 at their request, and I know we did Peaceful Easy Feeling. Probably Take It Easy would have been the next one. And we got about halfway through New Kid in Town, and nobody could remember the changes except for me.
So was this just you and Glenn, or is this a rhythm section?
Oh, no, it was Timothy. Joe was the only one who wasn't there.
Okay, so this is
Scott Craigo, who is the drummer for Don, and also with the Eagles and all that.
Yeah.
It was Scott, Timothy, Glenn, Don, and myself.
Okay, so you actually, it was a real audition.
Yeah, it was. It was funny because I think initially Don offered me the gig sort of outright, but then said, "Well, you got to come and play with my partner. Make sure he's happy." And yeah.
So then, how much pre-production? I mean, how much preparation are you doing once? Okay, let me back up. So, how hard of a decision was it to take the gig with the Eagles?
Harder than you might think. It wasn't exactly a no-brainer, because I knew that it meant playing the same thing every night, parts that I didn't create. But also, I mean, I realized that there was perhaps the potential that there could be some writing and recording and all that kind of stuff. I was so used to being my own boss, and working in a collaborative way with other people, sort of as an equal. And I knew that if I took this gig, I was going to have 4 bosses and be restricted into what I could do. Of course, I decided to do it in the end, and I have no regrets, because all of those things did happen, and it was a good thing. But I was a little nervous about giving up a lot of freedom.
Right, and it's in some ways it's like a Broadway show, to where it's like there's an expectation of everyone knows all those guitar parts, and so if you don't play them, people will know it.
Oh yeah, even the solos. I mean, you got a guy out there playing air guitar correctly,
right?
and you're going off script. He's going to be going,
yeah. I paid how much to see this guy mess up the solo, even though it was probably great. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how much preparation did you have to do before rehearsals started?
Oh my God. It was a heap of work. It was a heap of work. And partly because I had never met Joe. I didn't know Joe at all.
Yeah.
I didn't really feel comfortable with the idea of calling Glenn up and saying, "Hey, Glenn, on Already Gone, that second verse, that guitar lick, is that you, or is that Joe, or is that Don Felder?" I couldn't really imagine doing that. And of course, those would be the only 2 people that you would talk to find out how the arrangement went. So I wound up having to really learn almost every guitar part on those records, on about 30 or 40 songs, just in case. And although there was some help, the live record from 1980 was a big help, because you kind of knew which side of the stereo Joe was on and which side Don Felder was on, and that made it a little easier. And also the reprise, the
Hell Freezes Over.
Hell Freezes Over.
Yeah.
Video was a big help. But, you know, it was a ton of work,
Yeah. And so tonally, of course, you're having to cover different tones than you've had to in the past. So
Yeah.
what did you have to change to your gear to cover eagle tones?
Well, the distortion was really important. So I used a rat
Yeah.
initially for anything that was distorted, but I wasn't really happy with it for everything. It works great for one of these nights. But for Hotel California and stuff, I have been using a red snapper, Minotone red snapper,
Yeah.
which Shanks, what's it, John Shanks? Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah, it turned me on to that. Very nice guy. Um, it's a real nice sort of tube sounding distortion. And so that was the primary thing. And of course, you know, I got more than one echo because there are different, you know, programs you need to do for stuff. But that's really the biggest change was that. And then I'd never had like a full-fledged, you know, pedal board that, you know, we sort of had one built. It was built to order.
Right.
Yeah,
Just
nothing I would normally have. I'm sorry.
I had you know seen you like play with Winona, you know, in Nashville. It was a TV taping, and I remember you coming out holding your Strat, and you were cradling a couple of pedals, and you just put them down on the floor. No pedal board. And so you're going from this guy to all of a sudden you've got a, you know, a real, you know, an honest to goodness pedal board.
Yeah, I even the first pedal board I had was 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 just spread all over the place. It was not. Glenn used to look at it and kind of referred to it as, I think, a trailer park.
Yeah. How's the trailer park doing?
But yeah, and you know that rig comes in handy, and I've got a wah-wah if I need it, and you know, which I do on a couple of songs, I think.
Yeah.
So
Also,
yeah.
and you,
And the voice box too.
yeah. So, and you also had to have more guitars too. So,
Oh my God, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Well, I'd started to accumulate some guitars before the Eagles. But yeah, the Eagles gig, and everybody says, "Why do you need so many guitars?" Well, you know, one song wants a telly and another song wants a 335, and you know, maybe you've got something tuned down a half step, or you've got something that's got a capo on it, or you have to have stuff that's ready to go at all times. And I use all that stuff, and I'm glad to have it.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like you've had a number of like Music Man guitars. You had one, you know, like a double neck, and then one that looks like it has kind of P90 type things that it looks like you use to cover kind of Telecaster-y kind of things.
Right. Yeah. No, their stuff has been great. They made the double neck for me specifically, at which we didn't talk about this, but it's, you know, it's reversed. The next,
Right.
most of them have the 12 string, up top, and then the
Correct.
string on the bottom. So I had them reverse that. And there's a sister guitar, a black one, that goes on the road with this as well. Yeah, and those are great. And their necks feel great to me. They're the clean. They're really great for the clean stuff. But I think the humbucker, their version of a humbucker works pretty damn well too.
Yeah. So back to the, you know, so now you're in rehearsals with the Eagles, you know, for your first tour. What type of input are you getting from your bosses?
Well, I gotta say, they were pretty gentle with me. I mean, I'm so neurotic. I'm sure I'm at least as neurotic as Glenn was and Don is. So I was probably over prepared. I didn't have every little thing. I mean, you know, Glenn might say, well, you know, your tone's too bright on that solo there, you know. And all of them would chime in from time to time when something needed a tweaking, but it was usually small stuff. But as you and I discussed, you know, Don and Glenn very much into the small stuff, into the detail. And those parts didn't come about, casually. They didn't just sort of
Yeah.
play the first thing that came into their heads. I mean, those are parts that have been worried over. And one of the nice things about that gig is getting inside all of those songs and seeing how they're put together and how structurally beautifully they've been arranged. And a lot of that is Glenn, whose nickname was the Lone Arranger at one time. And with good reason. I mean, his ideas of arrangement were airtight. He really knew what he was doing with that stuff. So yeah, it was worth spending that time. But nobody raked me over the coals, and Joe was as sweet as he could be to me, and helpful, and it was not as insane as you might think at all.
Yeah. And again, Joe's doing what he's always done, and then you're having to cover Felder, and of course original guitarist Bernie Ledden. You're having to cover some of his parts and also some of Glenn's parts that he had kind of handed off.
Mhm. Yeah, it's there's a full plate.
Yeah, because they're stylistically quite different. You kind of have the B bender stuff from which I've never seen you use a B bender.
I've never used one in my life.
Yeah, so you're covering kind of the B bender stuff on Peaceful Easy Feeling and other tunes. And
Well, when I was playing in the DC area, there was a fair amount of country music blended in. I mean, it was everything from Little Feat to the Eagles, and there was a certain level of country that I was comfortable with, and it was Bernie's style was not unknown to me. I mean, Buchanan and Gatton played country style telly and all that, so I wasn't learning from scratch or anything on that. So, but yeah, I mean, you had to be able to go from that to Hotel California, and
right.
yeah, so that's pedal work, a lot of that.
Yeah. So the pedals are really kind of helping you out with that.
Oh yeah, definitely. Particularly the right snapper.
Yeah. So are you using guitar changes or EQ? Because again, you would talk about you said Glenn would say that sounds a little too bright. I mean, are you having to remember to turn your tone control down on the guitar? How are you making these adjustments?
Yeah. I mean, trying to do them on the fly. I'm obviously not into programming stuff. So
Right.
whatever happens is pretty much got to have Charlie, our tech, my guitar tech, Steve Cohen, but we call him Charlie, to differentiate him from the thousands of other Steve Cohens in the world. Charlie will often have me, it'll be in the right pickup with the right starting volume and all that kind of stuff too. So
Wow.
that's a big help. But it's not too much. I'm so used to doing things on the fly anyway. It's not a big deal.
Yeah. Let's talk about some of Glenn's, guitar playing, because a lot of people don't realize the things that he played that people probably thought was played by someone else.
Right.
So one of them is I Can't Tell You Why, which is one of the coolest, smooth, great guitar parts on any of the Eagles stuff.
As important to the song as the rest of the song. I mean, it's like what people remember. It's what you hear. It's a guitar solo you can hum. You can listen. That was a big revelation. Was Glenn's importance in the overall scheme of the Eagles. I mean, it was really his band, very much his band, and he was the arranger. He would really work up the sets, kind of run the rehearsals. But what a great guitar player with a very deep pocket, great parts. The other day I was listening to Randy Newman's Little Criminals record, which is peppered with a great deal of Eagles information there, both vocally and instrumentally. And check out Baltimore, which is Glenn playing guitar. The parts are simple, perfect. They're just, you can't do any better than that. And I don't know if a lot of people know that. Randy Newman, who spoke at Glenn's memorial, one of the things he said was, you know, he didn't think people realized how hard these guys actually like to work, you know, to get it really right. And Glenn was of that type, and you know, Newman was really deferentially impressed.
Yeah. Glenn seemed to have unlike most guitar players who love to change their gear and always getting new things, he seemed to have that little Fender Deluxe amp with a Vox speaker in it and a couple pedals, and he had that old black Les Paul Jr. that had been modified. That was kind of his rig.
And Deacon uses that rig to this day.
Yeah.
And it's funny too, because there's something wrong with the neck pickup. And I'm not sure exactly what it is, but it's like it got to this state and it doesn't want to be operated on. It's just, here it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lovely sounding guitar.
Yeah. All right. So, and what kind of guitar input does Don give?
You mean in the live stuff, or?
Yeah, in the context of the Eagles.
Well, I mean, he's actually, you know, pointed out some stuff to me about, you know, you're playing that phrase a little wrong. It's that one little note over there is kind of a throwaway. That's not really that important. You don't have to spend that much time on that note, but you know, play
Right.
or don't do a gliss on that opening note on the solo on New Kid or whatever.
So then there was the history of the Eagles tour, which ended up being Glenn's last tour, but also it had Bernie, you know, Bernie Ledden was kind of brought back into the band.
Yeah.
You know, you know, of course, you know, which causes an interesting set of, you know, not necessarily problems, but all of a sudden, because all these guitar parts have been worked out and his parts have all been farmed out already. And then he's kind of claiming them back, or how did that work out?
Well, yeah, I mean, you got to let him play his parts.
Yeah.
Yeah, it did create a little confusion. Just we weren't sure who was dancing with who or who was leading. Yeah, Joe and I had to mix our stuff up a bit. It took some doing. It took some doing, but you know, eventually the dust settled and everything was fine. But yeah, it was a little complex.
Yeah. And then was there any hint that, you know, that Glenn wasn't doing well, you know, physically?
No, not really. That really blindsided everybody. I think he had been taking medications, I think, for rheumatoid arthritis, I do believe. And I was always aware that, you know, he was doing stuff with his hands. He wasn't always really comfortable. And I think that you know, he would do a couple solos during the course of the night, but for the most part, I think that maybe he was happy to pass them on just so because of his hands, you know, maybe we're not treating him so well.
Yeah. So then there was the you know, the kind of memorial at the there was the performance at the Grammys with Jackson Browne and you and Bernie, and that was kind of seen as being kind of the last hurrah of the band at that point.
I guess, yeah.
Yeah. And so when did the idea come up of you know, we're going to do this, and we're going to get some other guys to come in?
I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, I ended up, I got a call.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, here's what we're thinking. And
Yeah.
rumors abounded and this and that. And, but, you know, I'm out here on the East Coast, so I don't know what all went back in LA, but,
Yeah.
oh, I think everybody's been glad for the most part. I mean, the shows have really been well received, and I didn't know that if people might resent the fact that, you know, we're doing it without one of the founding members.
Yeah.
But the shows have gone really well. The audiences have been great. And it's a lot of fun. Of course, now we're doing this thing. I hope the Hotel California start to finish with the orchestra, the choir, and all that. And hopefully that'll happen.
Yeah. So your old buddy Vince gets brought in. So, so did that seem like a strange twist of fate that all of a sudden you're playing in the Eagles with Vince, who you'd played on, on his sessions back in the 90s?
It was, you know, it's one of those things in life that, yeah, you never could have predicted. Crazy. I'm glad he's there. I mean, he sings beautifully. He plays guitar great. A lot of his gig is, finding where does that extra guitar come in, and laying out when he has to.
Right.
But it's a joy to be around him. And he just, he brings he's so funny. He's such a funny guy. Lighthearted.
Yeah. So yeah, you're kind of alluding to the fact that he's had to find his own space on the guitar, which is kind of filled up between you and Joe. So
Right. Yeah. Yeah. He's done fine with that. And you can also, which I stumbled on, you can get a full compliment here. Let's see.
Right.
So which is weird. Like it shouldn't really work because you got a shape like that, but it does manage to pick up.
So if you strum across it lightly at the correct fret, you can kind of get that harmonic sound.
Yeah, and you have to sort of go diagonally.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And no, are you using a Herco thumb pick?
No, actually, this is an Ernie Ball.
Okay.
I think they only have two sizes, and this is the larger of the two sizes. I don't know if they call it small and medium or medium and large, but I think it's the largest one. Yeah. And it's funny, they're not real consistent. I used to have to pick out the best ones as far as how much protrusion you want. And we told them, we found one that we really liked and asked them to make a duplicate. And for the most part, they're all quality control. They're all about the same length.
Yeah. And again, this comes from a flat picker asking a thumb picker about this, but it doesn't seem to. I guess you get used to strumming and with a thumb pick, because I mean, many people have a hang up when they try to use a thumb pick because like I can't strum with it.
Yeah, I just always have, but I will confess, if we're recording acoustic guitar and I'm strumming the acoustic, I'll use a flat pick because it's smoother. It's not as clunky. Yeah. This is a bit clunky. I mean, I can sort of make it seem like it's not clunky, but if I was trying to play that on an acoustic guitar in a track, it would probably stick out in an unpleasant way. When
you're composing a solo, are you just humming something in your head or something like that? Is that what it's based on? Or do you sing stuff, or where does that come from?
I don't know. Usually I just wait for inspiration, and there's usually some kind of germ of an idea, a bit of a melody or something that starts off that gets me going. And then you just kind of, I don't know, you chase it. I don't know how to describe it other than that.
Okay. And your strings, what kind of strings do you use?
Ernie Ball, 10 to 46 on almost everything, except for the wonderful Esquire in Nashville has a heavy bottom, skinny top, heavy bottom.
Yeah. And you tend to, am I correct in saying that you tend to have some guitars that are kind of spread out across the play? Well, you kind of have some guitars in Nashville that you just kind of have there, so you don't have to fly with stuff, or? Yeah.
I do so little work there now. All that stuff is over at Rodney's house.
Okay.
He's got a gear closet that my guitar coffin, which has I don't know, 8 guitars in it. One of them I miss, Martin 0018 from like 1957 or something like that. Really nice guitars there. My Esquire sometimes is there. Sometimes Rodney's got it out using it. There's a Paul Reed Smith of some kind in there. A couple of cheap Dan Electros. Some other Ernie Ball guitars.
Yeah. So those two Strats that you got early on, of course, you had the gentleman, was his name Mike Dennis? Was that his name?
Mike Dennis, yeah.
Yeah.
Mike Dennis.
So he influenced you into getting into the Strats and the Fender, Pro Reverb. So what was it about those two Strats that made you pick those up, and the fact that you still have them to this day? So
I don't know. The 66 Sunburst Strat is the easiest guitar to play of any guitar I've ever played. Much easier than most other Strats. And I have to say that the white Strat included, I find Strats a little difficult to play. They're not all friendly. And the white one not being an exception, a little tough, a little spongy feeling to me. The 66 just feels like a solid slab, and it's so easy to bend notes on it. This one is pretty easy. It's better. It's easier than most. I mean, and I grabbed it. It's a Mexican Strat.
yeah.
That I had EMGs, new tuning pegs, wide frets put on it. Yeah, I mean, that 66 can't be beat. I mean, it's a great guitar. The white one, like I say, it's sort of, it's waiting in the repair shop downstairs. And I haven't used it really in years.
Yeah. And do you have all your guitars? Has the 66, has it been refretted also with wider frets?
I think every guitar I own's got wide frets on it. Yeah.
Okay. Do you know which frets they are, or are they just?
I think Joe Glazer has done them. I think he told me that they were DiMarzio wide ovals.
Okay.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a fret they used to, that they started making back in the 70s or 80s. Yeah. Yeah. All right. And any other modifications that you've done to your Strat besides the frets and the EMG pickups?
No, although the 66 used to have this controlled the tone of the bridge pickup.
Right.
So you do this wah-wah thing, which I don't know if you ever saw the Rosanne Cash, My Baby Thinks He's a Train.
Yes.
Wah-wah.
Yeah.
It isn't a wah-wah. It's actually the tone control.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's wired that way anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, that's neat footage. Again, that was, Albert Lee had played on the original, and then you really, made it your own with this whole, kind of train sound at the beginning of it. And very nice. All right, guys. Well, welcome back. We, I had to take a nap, because Steuart wore me out. No, not at all. We did kind of the first part of the interview, and then we had a bunch of stuff that we left off. So we decided to come back to cover some things that we missed. So thank you again, Steuart. And let's talk about New York, because we talked a lot about Nashville and coming to here, but you also spent a lot of time in New York and LA. So let's talk about, the New York connection with the things through Rick Chertoff and other stuff that you did there. So
yeah, once again, Rick Chertoff is really key. I haven't seen him for a long time. I should look him up, but just about the exact same time that he hooked me up with Rodney, he was working in pre-production for a Willie Nile record for Sony. And a guy named Stuart Lerman was sort of heading that project as producer, engineer, et cetera. T-Bone Walk was the co-producer on it.
wow.
And so Rick introduced me to Stuart, and we hit it off immediately. And next thing I knew, I was coming up to do projects, like I say, smaller projects or less high profile, but really, really good stuff. The Roaches, Willie Nile,
Yeah.
um, Darden Smith, just and Dar Williams. And almost everybody we worked with, we did more than one album with. So there were a lot of projects up there in New York, and I would just grab a train from DC, 3 hours, and you're there. And you don't have to mess with the airports or anything. So it was really easy getting in and out of New York. So that really lasted. I mean, up until Steuart and I worked together last December and January, for that matter, doing another Dar Williams record. So
Yeah, you've cut a number of albums with her, and including like at least one appearance on Austin City Limits. And did you actually tour with her, or was that kind
yeah,
of?
we did. We toured. There's a really hard to find record called Dar Williams Out There Live. We did a tour in 2000, the fall and early winter of 2000, which was tons of fun. It was a great band. Gail Ann Dorsey, fabulous bassist.
Yeah.
Steve Polly on the drums. Yeah, it was a nice time. A nice time.
You mentioned taking the train, up to New York to be involved in these sessions. So I guess getting down to a little bit of logistics, are you just carrying a guitar or two with you? Yeah, what are you taking gear wise?
Well, I now have a passel of stuff up there. I've got, I guess, 5 or 6 guitars, a couple of amps, or actually just one amp. I've got one of those old Gibson stereo sort of trapezoid shaped deals.
Yeah.
Great quiet or low output amp. And between Steuart and me, we've accumulated all kinds of stuff. I got accordions up there, and
yeah,
any number of things, mandolins.
Yeah, that brings that you kind of have this. It doesn't seem like you like to travel with guitars, which who can blame you? So because it's so problematic. But that's really great that you've been able to kind of have a stash of equipment in Nashville and New York and different places, so that you can just.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a bunch of gear at Rodney's house, which used to be at SIR until they stopped doing that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, stuff there, stuff in storage at Don Henley's place in Malibu. I'm spread out all over the place.
Yeah. So like your 66 Strat that you don't have right now. So is it out in Malibu, or is it is it on a truck or something?
It's in the Eagles warehouse in Los Angeles right now. Okay. Yeah, there's a silver Ernie Ball Axis Sport that lives in New York at my buddy Steuart's place, that I don't always see, but if like I've done some touring with Rodney where I've used that guitar. I use that with Dar, one of my favorite guitars, but that lives in New York.
Yeah.
My little Esquire from 1955, 56, that lives at Rodney's. Mostly amps out at Henley's place from doing the records out there, and like 6 or 7 amps, I think.
Yeah. Tell us, how did your association with Ernie Ball come about with Music Man?
Oh, well, Sterling Ball, who was Ernie's son.
Yes.
And who took over the business, Biff.
Yes, Biff Ball. Yeah.
Was coming to gigs when I first started playing with Rodney, and he said, "You buy your own strings?" And I said, "Well, yeah, sure. What do you use?" And I actually did use Ernie Ball's. I said, I use your strings. So we'll give you some free strings. And next thing I know, he was bringing guitars down to the shows, and the necks all just feel great to me. There's something about their necks, and I guess they have the large frets built in. Yeah. And frequently a satin finish, which, I usually sort of sand down most of my guitars if they're laminated. Their stuff feels great to me. The whammy bars are set up the way I like them with the Strat, and yeah.
And how do you like your whammy bar set up?
I'm sorry?
And how do you like your whammy bar set up?
Oh, just stable enough that it rests flat. The bridge rests flat. You have to, use some muscle to get it to vibrato. But yeah, and nothing fancy, and
Yeah.
no nut locking things or any of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Uh, you seem to be able to use the vibrato a fair amount and not go out of tune. Is there anything special that you do to keep your guitars in tune?
No, not that I'm. Maybe sometimes, I used to put a little graphite in the nut, to make sure
Yeah.
that things would not lock when they're returning to their position. It's funny when we played in Los Angeles with Shawn with the trio. I was using exclusively my 66 Strat for the show at that point. Got a call from Dean Parks, who I guess was friends with Larry, and so
Yeah.
Larry had my info. And he was calling to ask me what I did to stay so in tune. It was an incredibly great compliment.
Well, because that's the thing about using the vibrato bar on a Strat or any guitar that doesn't have like a locking nut. It's really hard to keep them in tune, and you do a lot of, you don't just hit it lightly at times. At times you'll do some more aggressive work on it,
Oh
and
yeah.
it's just amazing how in tune you are. So
Hopefully.
hopefully, yes,
I
hopefully.
was at least one night.
Yes. For Dean Parks to see you and want to track down your phone number. Yeah.
I was so plumped up with pride. That was amazing. But
Yeah.
yeah.
And the Music Man guitars, of course you mentioned the double neck that of course, and then you've got some other Music Man guitars that you use for different purposes. It seems like the Axis with the Music Man P90-ish pickups, that seems to be a favorite of yours. You have like a sunburst one and the silver one that you mentioned.
Sort of kind of a telly vibe,
Yeah.
really sort of clean country. Most of like Bernie Leadon's parts and stuff, I would be playing one of the the Axis Sports. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting watching you play, like Peaceful Easy Feeling, where, he used a B bender and you're just, manually bending it and, bending it right in tune, which is great.
Hopefully.
Hopefully. Okay. So let's see. So what about Jules Shear?
Yeah. Really great songwriter. I guess two of his most high profile songs were All Through the Night, that Cyndi Lauper had a big hit with.
Yeah.
And a Bangles song, If She Knew What She Wants.
Yeah.
And there's at least a few more. He had a nice little run there of a bunch of things. And my buddy Steuart Lerman and he were old pals in New York, and did a couple of projects with him. One of them was called The Great Puzzle. That was probably the first one we worked on. That's a pretty cool record. Some great stuff on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's the from recording in Nashville, New York, and LA? What are kind of the differences that you see in the different styles that are kind of tendencies toward those recording bases?
Well, in Nashville, it's a little bit like a 9 to 5, or at least it used to be. I don't know that they're really doing things the same way these days. I suspect not. But at the time, it was a little like a 9 to 5 job. You did 10s, 2s, and 6s, which we discussed before. And it's relatively low pressure in terms of everybody's kind of on the same page. Everybody gets along. There's not like a lot of nasty competition, or at least there wasn't.
Yeah.
Between players and artists. It was a very, very sort of family, homey kind of a vibe there, plus work, New York, it was, you're not bringing a boatload of amps and effects and all that stuff. Most of the guys in New York kind of throw it on their gig bag and show up. And most of the studios have in-house gear that you can use. So you can take a cab to your gig, do your thing, and get out of there. In LA, they like to sort of sit around and talk about what you're going to do for about a half a day before you even play a note. It's that was definitely when the first few times that I worked in LA, that was the main thing I noticed was that, first off, show up at noon. No, if you're going to start at noon, you may be starting at 2 and you're going to have some coffee and a Danish and, talk about last night's basketball game. And then the philosophy of how you want to do your recording, and then maybe push a button, record button at 6 o'clock. So yeah, very, very loose and vibey.
Yeah. Did you have any preference of the three methodologies?
Well, in a way, I like the LA thing because I like that you're not necessarily sticking with the very first thing that comes up. I don't mind talking about philosophy, about how you want to approach a track, and take your time with overdubs and all that. I think the longer you spend in the studio, the better your product usually is. But yeah, I would say I'm partial to that. I'm somewhat partial to New York too, because that's very much where I always wanted to be. And it's, the pace is a little more intense, but it's also, as Levon Helm put it, it's an adult portion.
Yes. So, so let's talk about hitting kind of back on the Eagles. One, of course, you produced their last album, The Long Road Out of Eden.
Mhm.
So, how daunting was that? Because already you had been involved with the band playing live, and then all of a sudden you get to be involved in their process, which is very intentional. Isn't even a strong enough word to use as far as all the parts and everything. So tell us about working on that album and co-producing.
Well, let's see. We came at it from a bunch of different angles. Initially, we were supposed to, at the end of the first tour, which was summer of 2001, at the end of that summer, we had booked time in September to get together and write. All the members of the band would get together. And the date we were supposed to fly was, I can't recall if it was September 10th or September 12th, or it was right in there. And of course, everything
Right.
shut down. They
Yes.
started working, without me. And they wrote a song, Hole in the World, and did some stuff there. But when things loosened up and you could get back on an airplane, I would fly out there. And the initial approach was having everybody set up in the studio. Anybody could offer, whatever, I've got a chord progression, or I've got a groove, I got a lick, or what have you. And we would do that for a couple of weeks, try things out, kind of loose, but it's, with that many people at once, it's difficult to get something, very focused. So we went into the studios for a while, and we started off at Glenn's studio in West LA. And we were using his place for pre-production, really, initially. We worked in a studio in the Valley, that the name of which I cannot recall. And that was where we did one of my songs, one of Center of the Universe. We put that together, but I don't think much else came from those sessions other than demos and stuff, things that wound up being experimental. We also went to what used to be the old A&M studios, Henson, I think is maybe what it goes by now. And there we did come up with a bunch of stuff, not final stuff, but I remember we worked up Long Road Out of Eden there, a version of that was pretty close to what we wound up with finally, just, much more buffed and tweaked. But then it really came down to a lot of tracking in small units at Don's house and at Glenn's studio. And just a bit of ping-ponging back and forth between the two. Most of Don's songs were overdubbed too, and tweaked at his
Yeah.
studios in Malibu, and Glenn's stuff was done, of course, at his place in LA.
Now, would there be a full blown like tracking session? I mean, how much was this, kind of overdubbed and stuff? Like what would the tracking session, what would that look like player wise?
Well, gee, it's kind of hard for me to remember precisely how each thing went down. Every song
Yeah.
had its own thing. Sometimes we're tracking with drums, with Scotty on drums. Um, Don mainly would concentrate on trying to put the song together. Not so much of the drumming. Let Scott
Okay.
do a lot of that. Um, uh, yeah, a lot of overdubbing. I guess you'd have a demo sort of, and then you'd bit by bit sort of replace the demo stuff with, final take information.
Right.
Um, but yeah, there weren't a whole lot of like straight ahead tracking sessions. I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 of the songs were Glenn's like that. We definitely had a couple of songs where Scott and I would sort of would set up and play a track. Busy Being Fabulous was one, and Don would kind of guide us from the studio. Yeah, it's kind of all a blur.
Yeah.
And
And,
there were
and
so many different methods of doing things. It was
right.
really one thing at all.
And you're at a bunch of different studios and yeah. So when you're producing, do you tend to play while you're producing, or do you tend to, and are you set up in the control room with your guitar and running an amp into another room, or how do you normally produce and play?
That depends on the situation. Once
Okay.
again, there's almost no method. It's based on the song and what we need. Sometimes I'm in the studio playing along as well. Tend not to be. I tend to either be out there with the band for some tracks,
Yeah.
or if I'm overdubbing whatever, doing that in the studio. It's kind of hard to produce while you're playing. I did another record of cover songs with Shawn in Austin, and I played some of the time, but it just didn't make sense to try to really hone in on a part like that. So I tended to produce that one from the control room.
Yeah. And there, on Long Road Out of Eden, there was the kind of, a bit of almost kind of a throwback to their older sound with it, like How Long, with where they took actually an old song that they used to do, and I'm assuming that was you on the solo.
Yeah, I did all the electrics on that. I think Glenn did all the acoustics, and yeah, and that was I think people were assuming that it was an Esquire or a Telly or something, and that's actually all the guitars are the same one. It's a 335, and I can't recall if it was mine or if it was one of Glenn's beautiful old ones.
Wow.
But, that was all 335 stuff.
Yeah, when on live performances of that, you tend to use a Gibson Special or a Junior. Yeah.
Yeah, the Junior. Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, it's not nice sounding guitars. That was some of the few other vintage guitars that you take out on the road besides the Music Man's, or those the Special and the Junior that you play some.
Yeah, and there's also the what we have now determined was a 1967 Esquire that was a gift to me from Hank DeVito, lovely pedal steel songwriter, Renaissance guy. He was a great photographer.
Yes.
Bless his heart. I used to I'd go over to his house, and that guitar was there, and I would always wind up playing it, and one day he said, "Man, you love that guitar so much, I hardly ever use it. It's yours. Just don't ever give it away." So, and that was, I think originally it was a 67 that Joe Glazer put together a neck that would have been appropriate for that guitar. And that's the one I use for Boys of Summer and stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
Wonderful guitar.
Yeah. I didn't know if that was your old Esquire or no, but that's actually a 67 that Joe put a neck on.
Yes.
Yeah. Great.
Yeah, the really old one is over at Rodney's, and that one lives with the Eagles and Don.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's talk, one of the, of course, one of the big changes, with Glenn's, passing was, you had Deacon come into the band and,
Yep. Who has
and
been
yeah,
definitely has been playing and singing his butt off. He has stepped up and done it. And he's also an honest to God, really good guitar player. I mean, he can nail his dad's parts, but he definitely knows his way around the instrument. And I remember hearing stuff that Glenn recorded, just stuff for fun with the family kind of things. And Deacon was playing and already, years ago, sounding great. So
yeah.
I know he's the real deal.
So was he kind of around, would he come out on tour some with his dad or come out to shows and stuff like
Oh
that?
yeah, I mean, all of Glenn's kids at one time or another, and true of Don as well. They would come out for maybe a summer leg or whatever, and I think at least two of his kids actually held jobs. Like were with the crew or what have you.
Wow.
And what could be better?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with Deacon, it's kind of like a sink or swim kind of situation because all of a sudden, because playing at stadiums is very different than playing clubs or
Yeah.
or or being a studio guy or whatever that he had done in the past. And so there's kind of there's a sink or swim aspect to this. And yeah, such kudos to him for stepping up to the plate and killing it. So
Yeah, he's been unflappable. I mean, he's so laid back and quiet and just very together.
and front and center. I mean, he's
Yeah,
he's in his
I
dad's
know.
position.
I know.
Yeah.
He's done an amazing job, and he's got his dad's guitars. And we went to work up "Try to Love Again," uh, having never done it. I mean, that was one of the few songs when we started this Hotel California tour. And he said, he wanted to crack at the solo, and I just sort of mindlessly assumed that either Joe or I would probably play that solo. But of course, it was his dad. Once again, his dad playing a great part, and he nailed it. It's just of course.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been said, because I think originally when people heard of Deacon and Vince coming in, there was kind of a bit of a like, huh? But then it was like once they saw it, everybody got it and loved it. So
Yeah, I would not have predicted it. I mean, it was Don's call. I think it was a wise one, clearly.
yeah. Okay. Gear. I asked you to, bring out your old white Strat. I know you don't play it. It's
I was so shocked to find that the neck pickup is now currently working. I don't know why it wasn't, but yeah, here it is.
yeah.
You see this? Yeah.
Wow.
Great old guitar, but as wonderful as it's been, it's kind of a pain.
Why is it a pain?
It's not the easiest guitar to play. I have to say, I was spoiled by the 66 that I have and have had since 1975. That's the easiest guitar to bend strings on. I don't know why that is. In fact, the Fender Custom Shop guys very kindly took my 66 for a couple of weeks and did the thing where they do lasers and all that to measure every bit to make a duplicate guitar. And they made a very nice guitar, but it bears no resemblance whatsoever to the real 66 one.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but so I was used to the 66, which is very easy to play, but I was determined to get a vintage instrument and something with some vibe to it. And I eventually came up with this. I bought it from a guy in the DC area, a fellow player. And It really took some adjusting. I had to fight with it because it's not as easy to bend the strings. There's a sort of a spongy aspect to the way it feels. It doesn't feel solid. It sounds really nice, but as I discovered this morning, the output is considerably less than the EMGs. I mean,
Right.
those EMGs, the same ones supposedly that are on my 66 are on my black Mexican Strat here, and the output is substantially greater from
Right.
that guitar.
So which Strat did you get first? The 60, so you got the 66 first?
66 was the first guitar, the first really good guitar that I owned, I think.
Right.
I got that in 1975 from a guy who bought it from a pawn shop in Denver. $200. And that was my only guitar for a really, really long time.
Yeah. Now, again, looking back at old footage of you playing like from the 80s, and you see a fair amount of you playing, of course, the 66, but there's tons of footage of you playing that white Strat. And
I
it's
know.
just, it's interesting that you're saying that the 66 was a better guitar, but there's, I mean, tons of concerts where you're only playing that white Strat with Rodney or Rosanne. So
I got used to it. I adjusted to it, and
yeah.
but it was painful. It was almost like physical therapy. It was not an easy shift. I remember the first show we did when I actually took it out. We were opening for Waylon Jennings in some kind of theater in the round, and I thought, oh my God, what have I done? Because I
Yeah.
didn't have my 66 with me. I just took that guitar and assumed that was going to work out fine. And I realized that in the muscular moment of playing live in front of people, that it was not as responsive as, at least not in the same ways that the 66 was.
Yeah.
It was some work.
Well, it sounds like part of the reason you got it was you wanted an older Strat. Was there just, just because of the lore and the lure of it, you wanted an older one, or was that it, or what?
Yeah, and I think most of my guitar playing friends were all of the opinion that, Steuart, you got to get yourself a proper old guitar. These things, these new things.
Yeah. So yes,
There's some wisdom in that. I think the older a guitar is, or the more it's been played, probably, there's something to be said for that. The age shows, and I'm happy with what it ended up doing, but it was just a lot more work than I thought it might have been.
yeah. So the 66 kind of took over as your main guitar, and that seemed to be what you were seen with. And except for, I guess, with Colvin, you would have that guitar tuned down, or with that low C tuning, or
Oh yeah, yeah. I use that for the G over C, however you want to refer to it. Yeah, I use that for that stuff.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And kind of hitting back on what you said before, would you tour with one guitar when you were touring with Rodney? You said you just had that 50s, you didn't
I
have the other
I
guitar.
think initially I probably did. I might have actually had that white Strat, but I don't recall precisely.
Yeah.
But I think it was certainly the 66 was all I played from 1975 till 1985.
Yeah.
And then the white one took over and was the only, I mean, I would take both of them out, but the white one was the main one. I think I didn't realize that I could set the 66 up with the whammy bar the way that the white one had been. And once I got the 66 to happily, situated with the whammy bar, then that went back to being the main guitar.
Yeah. How much of your playing is informed from piano?
I think actually a fair amount. That's an interesting question. I think I'm often asking the guitar to do things that pianos and mandolins and 12 strings and trying to get other things out of that instrument other than what it was made for, perhaps. But having been a recovering piano player,
Yeah.
some of the chordal stuff I think I do is probably influenced by keys.
Yeah. And from some of the playing that you did earlier, watching your hand up close, it looks like you have a fairly light touch. Is that correct?
I think that's true. I mean, it's hard. That's hard to gauge because you don't know what I don't know what anybody else considers a light or a heavy touch. I
Right.
I do know that yeah, the lighter the touch for me, the more accurate it's going to be. But sometimes you have to have muscle. Yeah, sometimes you have to dig in. So
Right.
it's not, all the time. But I realized when I was playing with the Eagles the first couple of years, I was using it, which I do anyway, but like a flat pick more, doing more from here than involving the fingers. But as I relaxed and got into the gig, the fingers started coming into play, and now I'm back to, I think, a lighter touch. But it was a heavier touch at first because of probably nerves,
Yeah.
just the intensity of those live performances.
Was it also, I mean, of course you had played some big shows before, but those are probably some of the biggest shows you'd ever played before in your life, probably playing with the Eagles and in front of
Oh,
most
absolutely.
people.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think the biggest crowd that we'd ever played for, or the trio at the Lilith Fair,
Right.
was, I think, on average of probably like 25,000 people at a show, um, which is pretty, I mean, that's the size of an Eagles crowd for sure.
Yeah. Stage volume, with the Eagles and with the harmonies and such, I would assume that it's low, but what is the stage volume like for y'all?
Uh, I don't, it's not particularly low. It's not, I don't play really loud.
Okay.
Um, but it's pretty muscular, pretty loud up there.
Yeah.
Can get, and every now and then, we'll have to sort of, Donald or somebody will say, wait a minute, let's pull this thing back in a little bit. It doesn't have to be incredibly loud these days.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, and I've got one ear with for monitor, and then the other ear's open, and so I'm hearing my amps from over there. Um, yeah.
So are there wedges also, or are you only okay?
Yes.
Okay, so you've got an in-ear and you've got a wedge and you've got your amp going.
Yeah.
And then do you have certain things only going into one? Or
Yeah, I keep the drums and bass and my vocal in this ear, and that's it. And then everything else comes from the wedges and of course my
wow.
amp.
That's
Yeah, it's a little strange. That took getting used to. That
yeah.
definitely took getting used to.
Now, is that something that the other guys are doing also? Or
Mhm. I
okay.
think so, yeah. I'm not sure what everybody has in their separate units, but almost everybody's got one ear, wired in, and then the
Yeah.
other one free.
And
So
hence the use of so the in-ear and the wedge. Everyone's doing that kind of system.
yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
That's very interesting because most are one or the other, you know.
No, I think the keyboard players have stereo mix, and they're stationary, and that information is not coming out of amps. So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. What about in recording? Do you tend to have your amps up pretty loud or down? How like your amps? Where would you set them at volume wise? Like you would doing a show or down lower when you're recording? Yeah.
Well, I mean, once again, it depends upon the song, the amp, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
In New York, I've got my buddy Steuart has a Silverface Vibrolux, and it is great for so many things. There's almost nothing it can't do, and I don't know if I've ever run across an amp like that. Usually at around two, the volume at around two, bass and treble around six. Um, and that's just a good basic sound, basic, relatively clean sound. And as you come up in level, you go towards 3 and 4, you're starting to get a pretty good amount of punch.
Yeah.
Um, and like I say, also I have the Gibson stereo amp there as well, which you can just turn everything up all the way on that, and it sounds great. And that's of course more distorted.
Yeah.
In Nashville, I used to use clean stuff, basically a clean initial track with 63 Fender Super and that twin that I told you about.
Yeah.
Silver face, remarkably good sounding twin. And that was like about volume level about 2 would be really nice on that.
Okay. So, the Super and the Twin was kind of your combination for playing the Nashville stuff, and then you had the
Kind of
Vibrate
was, yeah,
for
yeah,
the Gibson amp.
yeah.
Yeah.
And there's a ton of amps that I've got out at Don's. I've got an AC30, a 65 amps London combo amp, which is really nice. For the distorted stuff, a lot of the rockin' stuff on Long Road, we had a couple of Gibson Falcons.
Yeah.
One of them was great. One of them was pretty good. And actually we had a third that was kind of worthless, but, and that was for like distorted, for rock and roll stuff.
Yeah. How did you end up on the, I mean, I guess, looking at, footage through the years, you kind of used, Fender Twins a lot early on with Rodney and Rosanne, it looked like, or,
Mhm.
I guess could have been a Pro or something like that. And then, but with the Eagles, you've used, looks like PV Classic 50s, like the 410.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I wanted something that would be louder than, a Pro, but not as powerful as a Twin, which is just too much
Yeah.
clean sound. And someone had told me about the classic 50s, and I tried one out. Oh, you know what? I think it might have been Brent Mason. I think Brent Mason on a session had 2 classic 50s running in stereo, and it was great sound. And I think that's why I went and tried those. And I got one for the Eagles and was like, okay, great. So I've got a bunch of those. I now have a little Walter.
Yeah. Phil Bradbury.
Phil, nice guy,
Yeah.
sweetheart. He built me one, said, if you like it, great. If you don't, no problem. I'll take it back. But he built basically his version of a Super, of a Bassman.
Yeah.
And with 410s and all of that. And to my ear, it sounds fabulous. And all the crew seem to think so too. So those classic 50s are now going to be gone, and in place of them, there'll be the little Walter version of that. I don't know what he calls it. I can't recall, but
but it's a 410, Bassman type amp.
410, what is that, 60 watts or something like that?
Yeah, about around 50, 60, somewhere around there.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
do you use 2 or 1?
I've got 2 on stage, but only because in the event that one goes down, and I've got
Okay.
shipped over. It's like a backup if I need it.
Yeah. And do you prefer 10s?
For 10s?
Yeah, 10-inch speakers. Just depends on the amp.
They seem to have, what's in an AC30? 2 10s?
2 12s.
2 12s.
Yeah.
Go figure.
Yeah. It's just whatever works.
Yeah, exactly.
What have we not hit upon?
Well, one thing I would like to say, you had asked before about how was the transition when Glenn passed away.
Okay.
As far, the rehearsing and seeing as how Glenn used to run the rehearsals and all of that. You had asked about how that went. And one of the things that I think that I neglected to mention is it sure does not hurt that that Will Hollis, Michael Thompson, and Scott Crago and myself have been playing this material for 20 years.
Yeah.
Such that when, in the absence of, Glenn's running the show, everybody pretty much knew what their role was, what it had to be. And I think that, that really helped the transition a lot. The fact that they were really, there's a core of players. It's basically Don's band without a bass player and without a second guitar player, that have been backing up Don and backing up the Eagles for 2 decades. And in Scott's case, he goes back to, the drummer goes back to Hell Freezing Over.
Wow.
So, but aside from him, Will Hollis and Mike Thompson and myself and Scott, we've been there for a long time. And I think that probably was a huge help in the transition.
Yeah, the veterans. Yeah,
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
guys that that have been in the trenches for 20 years. Yeah,
exactly. Not that Don and Joe and Timothy are, don't have to, sometimes crack the whip or do whatever, but it was not the chaos that it could have been.
yeah. What kind of adjustment was there? Again, because you also had been kind of the sole guitarist in a lot of the bands that you worked with, the sole electric guitarist.
Right.
Uh, and then all of a sudden, did you have to hone in your sound at all when all of a sudden working in a bigger band with more other things going on? Did you have to think about things EQ wise, or is that being done at the board and such? Or
No, not really. I pretty much play the way I've always played. Of course, a lot more pedals. I mean, not that many more, but having a second echo and things like that were different. And of course, the red snapper was a great discovery for me as
yeah,
far as distorted stuff. Um, I didn't really, maybe, I mean, I had to adapt a little bit, but it also depends upon the song. I mean, going from the really clean, fat, jazzy sound of I Can't Tell You Why to, what have you, Take It Easy, any of the other songs. That's a pretty broad spectrum, but I don't know, I've just managed to somehow tweak it out.
all right. So we got Steuart to get his guitar out, and he's gonna I think he's gonna start off by showing us some fake pedal steel stuff that he's, of course, we all want to know, and he's gotten questions about. So thank you, Steuart.
Yeah. So this first thing is, I guess it's like the third or fourth verse of The Last Resort. There's a little pedal steel part that comes in there. So.
Wow, that's so you've got the vibrato bar that you're using, you've got the volume pedal that you're bringing in to swell things, and really getting a very nice faux pedal steel type part on there. That's very nice.
Uh, let me show you another one. This is a solo that I sort of put together for a song that Emmy Lou and Rodney did on their second duets record. Try not to mess it up. It's from a song called "Just Pleasing You." So there's that.
Wow, very, very convincing. Wow.
Good.
And did Hank DeVito contact you saying that he wants his guitar back? That I was supposed to play on that. I'm kidding.
Well, it's funny too, because on the session for that song, I don't remember the guy's name, but there was a C6 player, whose ancestry goes back to the Bob Wills and all of that.
Oh,
The
wow.
non-pedal steel stuff.
Right.
And he and I were playing on that song together. It was so strange for me to be taking the solo.
Well, I guess they wanted more of that sound, I guess they wanted more of the pedal steel E9, sound, which that's
Right.
what
Yeah.
you were doing.
Let me see if I can work out this wangy bar thing that I've got. It's a solo that I put together for a friend of mine. And basically the changes are, it was in the key of A. And it was basically going from the 5 chord to the 4 chord 3 times, and then
That's really mind-bending stuff. The way you kind of will use slurs where you're kind of sliding up to things and the vibrato bar all at the same time. I mean, that's like your solo on I Don't Want to Spoil the Party, with Rosanne. There were some of those
right,
kind of
yeah.
things also, those are really great techniques. And it seems like you're doing these chordal shapes that are kind of in the middle of the neck. And well, what I mean by that is like the B, G, and D strings. You're doing a lot of things based on those, and sixth chords and things that are
Yeah. Well, and then D.
yeah. That's very cool. Funnily enough, a friend of mine is the son-in-law of Winona Judd, and he also plays with her at times, and he also tours with the Dixie Chicks. And his name is Justin Weaver, and so he was mentioning how much he learned from having to learn your parts on to touring with Winona, and just how educational it was.
Oh,
And
wow.
and how much he appreciated it. And he was geeking out, and he was, when I told him I was going to interview you, he was saying, he fed me some of the questions that I got, just because he had such an appreciation, because he had to learn all your parts on the on all those songs. So
Wow.
yeah,
Nice. Thanks for sharing that.
absolutely.